The February sun hammered down on Camp Sentinel like divine judgment, turning the Virginia training ground into a crucible of heat and ambition. 8 Navy SEALs stood in a loose formation on the 1,000-yard range, their tactical gear dusty and worn from a morning of drills. Warriors forged in the fires of Iraq, Afghanistan, and a dozen other hellholes that would never make the evening news. Men who had earned their trident through blood, sweat, and an unyielding refusal to quit. And beside them stood a woman. She wore no uniform, no name tape identified her, no rank insignia decorated her shoulders. Faded denim jeans, a battered leather jacket despite the murderous heat, and a worn baseball cap that had seen better decades. Her rifle case was custom work, matte black carbon fiber with no manufacturer's logo, no military markings, nothing to suggest where it came from or who carried it. Her eyes, hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses, scanned the range with a stillness that unnerved the men around her. Lieutenant Garrett Sloan, 34 years old with sun-bleached hair, and the kind of confident swagger that came from surviving 3 deployments, let out a low whistle. He nudged the operator beside him and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is the DoD's big experiment? A backwoods girl with her granddaddy's hunting rifle?" Laughter rippled through the SEAL formation. Another voice chimed in, younger, crueler. "Bet she learned to shoot cans off fence posts. This is going to be embarrassing." The woman didn't react, didn't turn her head, didn't shift her stance, didn't acknowledge their existence. She simply stood there, still as stone, waiting. In the observation tower overlooking the range, an old man watched through weathered eyes that had seen more than their share of remarkable shooters. Sergeant Major Thaddeus Hargrave, 71 years old, retired Army Ranger with a chest full of ribbons from wars most people had forgotten, stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He recognized that stillness, that particular quality of focus that separated true snipers from mere marksmen. He'd seen it before, 28 years ago, in a young Ranger captain named Nolan Blackwood. Nolan's daughter, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the wind. After all these years, she found her way here. The range master, a grizzled Navy chief with 3 combat deployments and the scars to prove it, called out the parameters. 1,000-yard qualification, 10 targets at varying ranges, 800 to 1,200 meters. Variable wind, gusting to 15 knots. You'll have 10 rounds, 15 minutes. Make them count. 4 weeks earlier, the Montana wilderness lay frozen under 3 feet of snow. The cabin sat in a valley so remote that maps didn't bother marking it, 3 hours from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a dirt track that washed out every spring and froze solid every winter. Kira Blackwood sat on the porch steps in the dying light of a January afternoon, a rifle across her knees, her breath misting in the cold air. She was 27 years old, but carried herself with the self-contained confidence of someone who'd spent most of her life alone. Dark brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, gray eyes that seemed to measure distances even when looking at nothing in particular. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the wood stove. Outside, the world was silent except for the occasional crack of ice-laden branches and the whisper of wind through pine trees. She held a leather-bound journal in her hands. The cover was coffee-stained and weather-worn, with a bullet hole punched clean through the front. The pages inside were filled with precise handwriting, technical diagrams, and observations that spanned years of military service. Captain Nolan Blackwood's field journal, her father's legacy. Kira turned to a page she'd read 100 times before, but still studied with the intensity of a student before an exam. The entry was dated March 1993, Kuwait. "Learned the false wind method from Sergeant Major Thaddeus Hargrave today," her father had written. "Counterintuitive as hell, but it works. In the sandstorm engagement, he made a 1,200-yard shot that saved 6 of us, including me. The man's a legend. If I don't make it home, find Thad. He'll teach you what I couldn't." Kira closed the journal slowly, her fingers tracing the bullet hole. Her father had been carrying this journal when he died in Somalia in 1997. The bullet that killed him had passed through these pages first. She'd been born 3 weeks after he died. Her mother, 8 months pregnant and shattered by grief, had given birth to a daughter she could barely look at without breaking down. By the time Kira was 3, her mother had remarried and moved away, leaving the child with Nolan's older brother, Marcus. Uncle Marcus. Ex-Delta Force, hard as nails, kind in the way that men who'd seen too much violence sometimes became. He'd raised Kira in this cabin, teaching her survival, discipline, and marksmanship. Not because he wanted to create a soldier, but because these were the only ways he knew how to show love. Marcus had died 2 years ago. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. Kira had been with him at the end, holding his hand as he whispered his final words. "You're your father's daughter. He'd be proud of what you've become." Now she lived alone in the Montana backcountry, making money as a wilderness guide in summer, trapping in winter, and trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with skills that had no place in the modern world. The journal mentioned Thaddeus Hargrave 40 times across its pages. Her father had clearly respected the man deeply, trusted him completely, but Kira had never met him, never even tried to find him. What would be the point? Her father was dead. The past was dead. All she had were these pages and the techniques they contained. She opened the journal again, this time to page 63. A detailed diagram of wind patterns and trajectory calculations, annotated with her father's precise observations. "The false wind method," she read aloud to the empty porch. "When apparent wind contradicts terrain indicators, trust the terrain. Calculate the inverse of what doctrine suggests. Conventional wisdom says left, you go right. It's madness until it saves your life." She'd practiced this technique for years, using it in situations where traditional wind reading failed. It worked. She didn't fully understand why, but it worked. Her phone buzzed, a rare intrusion in this isolated place. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally she'd ignore it, but something made her answer. "Yes? Miss Blackwood? Kira Blackwood?" A man's voice, middle-aged, nervous energy barely contained. "Depends on what you want. My name is Agent Fowler. I'm with the Department of Defense, Contractor Liaison Division. I'm calling about a video that's been circulating in certain military circles." Kira's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what video he meant. 3 months ago, December, she'd made the mistake of entering an underground shooting competition in Wyoming. Not one of the sanctioned matches where paperwork and background checks were required, but the kind of event that moved around the Southwest like a traveling circus, where men gathered to prove themselves with rifles, and nobody asked questions about names or histories. She dominated the competition. An 1,800-yard shot on a moving target in 20-knot crosswind. Conditions that should have made accuracy impossible. She'd made the shot look easy, collected her cash prize, and tried to leave before anyone could get more than a glimpse of her face. But someone had filmed it. 9 seconds of grainy cell phone footage showing a figure in a gray cap making an impossible shot. The video had gone viral in military forums, shared through Reddit and veteran Facebook groups, analyzed frame by people trying to reverse engineer her technique. "I'm not interested in government work," Kira said flatly. "Miss Blackwood, please, just hear me out. The Department of Defense is running baseline assessments on SEAL sniper training protocols. We need a civilian control group, someone with demonstrable skill but no formal military training, no institutional bias. Find someone else. 3 weeks at Camp Sentinel, Virginia. You shoot, we measure performance metrics, you walk away with $50,000. No strings, no obligations. $50,000. That was real money. Enough to fix the cabin's roof, pay property taxes for years, maybe even buy the adjacent 40 acres that had just gone up for sale. But still, government work meant paperwork, questions about her background, people digging into a past she preferred to keep buried. "I'll think about it," she said, preparing to hang up. "Miss Blackwood, wait. There's something else you should know." Agent Fowler's voice changed, became more careful. "Your father served under Sergeant Major Thaddeus Hargrave, Gulf War, 1991. Hargrave is the senior evaluator for this program. When he saw your video, he specifically requested you." The world seemed to stop. "Thaddeus Hargrave requested me?" He said, and I quote, "If she's half as good as her father, we need her." He seemed to know Captain Blackwood quite well. Kira looked down at the journal in her lap, at her father's handwriting describing the man who'd saved his life, who'd taught him techniques that no manual contained, who'd asked to be found if the worst happened. "I'll be there," she heard herself say. "3 weeks, then I'm gone." "Excellent, I'll send you the details. And Miss Blackwood, thank you." She ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness, watching snow begin to fall again. The journal felt heavier in her hands, as if her father's ghost had just made its presence known. "Thaddeus Hargrave," she whispered to the night. "Finally going to meet you, old man. Hope you're ready." Camp Sentinel existed in that gray space between official military installations and the black sites that governments never acknowledged. Nestled in the Virginia mountains, surrounded by forests so thick that satellite imagery showed nothing but green canopy, it served as a training ground for America's most elite warriors. SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, Marine Scout snipers, men who could put a bullet through a target's eye socket from 1,000 yards away and then disappear into terrain like smoke. Kira arrived on a Tuesday morning in early February, driven in an unmarked van with blacked-out windows. When the doors opened, she stepped out into cold mountain air that reminded her of home and found herself facing a compound that looked more like a college campus than a military base. Low-slung buildings, training ranges carved into the hillsides, and an atmosphere of quiet professionalism that made her immediately aware of how out of place she was. Agent Fowler met her at the gate. He looked exactly like his voice suggested, mid-40s, soft around the middle, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that might have been appropriate in an office, but looked ridiculous here. "Miss Blackwood, welcome to Camp Sentinel. How was the drive?" "Long." She pulled her rifle case and a small duffel bag from the van. "Where do I need to be?" "Briefing in 30 minutes. I'll show you to your quarters first." The room they assigned her was Spartan but clean. Single bed, desk, footlocker, window overlooking a pine forest. She unpacked quickly, methodically, a lifetime of camping and fieldwork making the process automatic. Rifle case on the bed, carefully opened. Clothing in the footlocker. Her father's journal on the desk, positioned where she could see it. She allowed herself 5 minutes to breathe, to center herself, to prepare for whatever was coming. Then she grabbed her rifle case and headed to the briefing room. The room was larger than she expected, with seating for perhaps 200 people, though only a dozen were present now. 8 men in tactical clothing sat in the front rows, their body language radiating casual competence and barely concealed skepticism. They ranged in age from late 20s to late 30s, all carrying the lean, hard-muscled build of men who lived in constant physical readiness. Combat veterans, every one of them. Men who'd earned their place through blood and determination. And then there was Kira, standing at the back in her jeans and leather jacket, looking like she'd wandered into the wrong building entirely. The conversations died as she entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked her movement as she chose a seat in the back row, set her rifle case down carefully, and waited. Lieutenant Sloan leaned toward the man beside him and spoke in a stage whisper clearly meant to be heard. "Is that the civilian contractor? Seriously?" Another SEAL, red-haired with freckles and a friendly face, elbowed him. "Shut up, man. Give her a chance." "Dex, come on, look at her. She's probably never seen real combat in her life." Kira didn't react. She'd heard variations of this conversation her entire adult life. Skepticism was just noise. Proof was what mattered. The door at the front of the room opened, and a woman entered with a kind of presence that made everyone instinctively straighten. Colonel Renata Sterling, 52 years old, with steel gray hair and a tight bun, and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. She wore BDUs with more ribbons and patches than Kira could identify, and she moved with the absolute confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years commanding men in impossible situations. "Gentlemen," Colonel Sterling said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room, "and contractor, welcome to Camp Sentinel." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sterling had been teaching men to kill from distance since before most of them were born, and she had no patience for ceremony. "You're here because you're supposed to be the best," she continued, pacing slowly at the front of the room. "You've earned your trident. You've proven yourselves in combat. The Department of Defense has invested millions in your training." She paused, letting that sink in, then gestured toward Kira without looking at her. "Contractor Blackwood is here as our baseline. Civilian sniper, no formal military training, no SEAL experience, no combat deployments. She represents raw skill without institutional knowledge. You're being measured against her performance." The room shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Sloan stood up, his face flushing. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is insulting. We're trident holders. She's just what, Lieutenant?" Sterling's eyes cut to him like a blade. "A woman? A civilian? Someone who makes you uncomfortable?" "I didn't say that, ma'am." "Then sit down and prove that your training and experience produce results beyond what raw talent can achieve." Her gaze swept the room. "Unless you think a civilian can outperform you." The silence that followed was thick with wounded pride and simmering resentment. These were alpha warriors, men who'd built their identities on being the most dangerous people in any room. The suggestion that a civilian woman might outperform them wasn't just offensive, it was existentially threatening. Kira sat in the back and said nothing. She'd expected this. Hell, she'd have been surprised if they'd welcomed her with open arms. The door opened again, and an old man walked in. The change in the room was immediate. Even without conscious thought, the SEALs straightened, their casual confidence giving way to something more respectful. This man commanded attention not through rank or volume, but through sheer presence. Sergeant Major Thaddeus Hargrave moved like someone who'd spent 50 years training his body to obey without question. Despite his 71 years, he stood ramrod straight, with white hair cropped military short and eyes that missed nothing. He wore civilian clothing, khakis, a button-down shirt, hiking boots, but the way he carried himself made it clear he'd never truly left the service. His eyes scanned the room professionally, assessing, cataloging. Then they landed on Kira. The moment stretched out, electric and heavy. Hargrave's jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his weathered face, too fast for the others to see, but impossible for Kira to miss. He saw her father in her features. The same gray eyes, the same set of the jaw, the same way of standing with weight balanced and ready. 28 years collapsed into nothing, and he was looking at his dead friend's daughter for the first time. Colonel Sterling made introductions. "Gentlemen, this is Sergeant Major Thaddeus Hargrave, retired. He'll be serving as senior evaluator for this program. The Sergeant Major has more combat experience than everyone in this room combined, and I expect you to afford him the respect his service deserves." Hargrave nodded curtly, but didn't speak. His eyes hadn't left Kira. Sterling continued with the briefing. Training protocols, evaluation metrics, safety procedures. The words washed over the room, professional and necessary, but Kira barely heard them. She was watching Hargrave, and he was watching her, and between them flowed 28 years of promises, broken and kept, of ghosts and legacy, of a connection neither of them had expected to find. When the briefing ended and the SEALs filed out, Kira waited. She knew he'd want to speak with her, and she needed to speak with him. Hargrave approached slowly, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. Up close, she could see the weight of his years, the deep lines around his eyes, the liver spots on his hands, the slight stiffness in his gait that suggested old injuries never fully healed. But his eyes were clear and sharp, and when he spoke, his voice carried the gravel of age and authority. Kira Blackwood, Sergeant Major Hargrave. They stood facing each other in the empty briefing room, two people connected by a man who'd been dead for 28 years. "I'm sorry," Hargrave said finally. "I should have found you sooner. You tried, Uncle Marcus told me. After my father died, you called the Casualty Assistance Office. They said I went to family. I should have pushed harder." Kira shook her head. "You did what you could, and Uncle Marcus did right by me. He raised me the way my father would have wanted." Hargrave's throat worked. "Nolan Blackwood was the best shooter I ever trained. He saved my life twice. Once in Kuwait, pulled me out of a burning Humvee under fire. Once in Somalia, when we got separated from our unit during an ambush." "He wrote about you," Kira said quietly. She pulled the journal from her jacket pocket, held it out. 40 times across these pages, he wanted me to find you." Hargrave took the journal with hands that trembled slightly. He opened it carefully, reverently, and began reading his dead friend's handwriting. His eyes moved across the pages, and Kira saw tears forming that he refused to let fall. "The false wind method," he said, finding the page she'd marked. "He learned that from me in Kuwait. Only 3 people alive know that technique. I taught your father. He taught you through these pages." "It works," Kira confirmed. "I don't fully understand why, but it works." "There's more," Hargrave said, closing the journal carefully. "Your father only wrote down 60% of what I taught him. The other 40%, that's what gets you killed if you don't know it. And it's what will save your life when nothing else can." Kira felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe, or purpose. "Then teach me. That's why I requested you when I saw that video from Wyoming. That 1,800-yard shot in the crosswind, you used the false wind method. I recognized it immediately." He handed the journal back. "Your father asked me to teach you if he didn't come home. I'm 28 years late, but I'm here now. What do I need to do? First, you need to show these SEALs that you belong here. Tomorrow, 1,000-yard qualification. They're going to test you, mock you, try to break your confidence. Don't give them the satisfaction." Kira's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile if it had reached her eyes. "I've been underestimated my whole life, Sergeant Major. I'm used to it." "Good." Hargrave's expression turned serious. "But after you prove yourself to them, the real work begins. I'm going to teach you things your father never had time to learn himself. Things that will make you the most dangerous person on this range." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Kira, your father's last words to me before he deployed to Somalia were, 'Take care of my daughter if I don't come back.' I failed that promise for 28 years. I won't fail it again." Then he was gone, leaving Kira alone in the empty briefing room with her father's journal and the weight of legacy settling on her shoulders like snow. She opened the journal one more time to the final entry her father had made before he died. "If you're reading this, little one, then I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted to teach you myself, wanted to watch you grow up, wanted to be there for all the moments fathers are supposed to see. But if Thad found you, if he's teaching you what I couldn't, then know this. You're my legacy. Whatever you become, whoever you choose to be, make it count. A rifle is a tool of precision, but using it without conscience is just murder from a distance. Be better than that. Be better than me." Kira closed the journal and pressed it against her chest, eyes closed, breathing slowly. "I'll try, Dad," she whispered. "I'll try." The first test came on day 3. The February morning broke cold and clear over Camp Sentinel, frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. The 1,000-yard range stretched out before them, targets positioned at varying distances from 800 to 1,200 meters, steel plates that would sing when hit and remained silent in failure. The 8 SEALs assembled first, their movements efficient and professional as they prepared their weapons. Lieutenant Sloan worked with exaggerated confidence, his custom rifle gleaming with expensive modifications. Petty Officer Dex Callahan, the red-haired SEAL who tried to defend Kira in the briefing, checked his equipment with quiet confidence. The others fell somewhere in between, each man carrying the swagger that came from surviving 3 or 4 deployments in the world's worst places. Kira arrived last, carrying her rifle case with the same unhurried certainty she brought to everything. She wore the same worn jeans and leather jacket, the same gray baseball cap pulled low. If the cold bothered her, she gave no sign. In the observation tower, Thaddeus Hargrave watched through high-powered binoculars, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He'd spent the last 2 nights lying awake, remembering Nolan Blackwood, remembering the promise he'd made and failed to keep. Now, finally, he had a chance at redemption, but only if Nolan's daughter was as good as that Wyoming video suggested. The range master called out the parameters: variable wind, gusting to 15 knots, 10 targets, 10 rounds, 15 minutes. Standard SEAL qualification that separated competent marksmen from true snipers. Lieutenant Sloan, you're up first. Sloan approached the firing line with the confidence of a man who'd never failed a marksmanship test in his life. He settled into position, made his calculations, and began engaging targets with methodical precision. His first shot kicked up dust 2 feet left of the target. He corrected. Second shot, high. By his 6th round, he'd managed 7 hits out of 10. Respectable, not exceptional. The other SEALs followed in sequence. Most hit 6 or 7 out of 10. Dex Callahan, clearly one of the better shooters, managed 8. Good scores by any reasonable standard, but nothing that would make the instructors take special notice. Then Sloan ran the course again, knowing the wind patterns now, understanding the range. This time he hit 9 out of 10, missing only a partially obscured target at 1,100 meters that even the range master admitted was borderline impossible. 9 out of 10. Time, 13 minutes 40 seconds. Sloan stood from the firing line, clearly satisfied. He looked toward where Kira was preparing her rifle, his expression saying everything he didn't speak aloud. Your turn, contractor. Let's see what you've got. Kira unpacked her rifle with movements that seemed almost ritual in their precision. The weapon was custom work, a bolt-action platform built by someone who understood that accuracy wasn't just about tolerances in barrel harmonics, but about the connection between shooter and steel. No logos, no manufacturer markings, just functional beauty designed for a single purpose. On the barrel, barely visible, were small scratches. Notches. Too many to count in a glance. She assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Then she knelt at the firing line in a position that made several of the SEALs exchange glances. Not prone like they'd been taught, not sitting, but kneeling with her left leg forward and the rifle resting on her knee, an old-school position that most modern snipers had abandoned. In the tower, Hargrave leaned forward, binoculars pressed to his eyes. That position, that exact stance, he taught it to Nolan in Kuwait because it allowed faster transitions between targets and better stability in rocky terrain. Seeing it again, performed by Nolan's daughter, who'd learned it from journal notes, made his chest tight. The range master called out the target sequence. Kira didn't acknowledge him. Her breathing slowed to something barely perceptible, her awareness expanding outward to read wind patterns in the subtle movement of grass, to feel temperature gradients on her skin, to calculate atmospheric density from the way sound carried across the valley. The world fell away. All that remained was intention meeting physics, will becoming trajectory. Her first shot broke the morning silence like thunder. 200 yards downrange, the steel target sang with a sound like a church bell. Dead center. Perfect. She chambered the next round with liquid efficiency, the bolt working with the smooth precision of a machine-made flesh. Second shot, Another perfect hit. By the fifth shot, the SEALs had stopped pretending not to watch. They stood in a loose cluster, arms crossed, faces showing various degrees of disbelief and grudging respect. Shot 6 found a target at 900 yards, partially obscured by terrain features. The angle was difficult, the wind swirling unpredictably through the valley. Kira held for 4 seconds, reading patterns invisible to anyone else, then fired. The target rang true. The range master lowered his binoculars, checked his spotting scope, then keyed his radio. How did she see that target? It's 70% concealed from this angle. In the tower, Hargrave smiled grimly. Terrain reading. Another skill he'd taught Nolan, who'd written about it in the journal, who'd somehow passed it down to a daughter he never met. Shot 7. Shot 8. Different distances, different angles, some clear and some obscured. Kira moved through the sequence with a rhythm that seemed almost meditative, each shot measured and deliberate, no hesitation between rounds. Shot 9 hit a target at 1,100 yards that had defeated half the SEALs, the same one Sloan had missed. Kira's bullet found it cleanly, the ring of impact carrying clearly across the range. 1 shot left. The final target was the hardest, positioned at 1,000 yards, but partially obscured by brush, with wind swirling through the bowl in unpredictable patterns. This was the shot that separated good snipers from exceptional ones. Kira made an adjustment to her scope, tiny and almost imperceptible. Then she settled in, breathing, waiting. 10 seconds passed. 15. The SEALs began to shift, wondering if she was struggling. In the tower, Hargrave knew better. She was reading the wind using the false wind method, waiting for the moment when apparent conditions contradicted terrain indicators, when conventional wisdom would lead her astray and counterintuitive calculations would guide her true. 20 seconds. Then Kira fired. The bullet flew through morning air, cutting through wind and distance like destiny. The target sang, clear and bright. 10 out of 10. Perfect score. The range master checked his chronograph, checked it again, then spoke into his radio with careful neutrality. Time, 6 minutes, 18 seconds. The silence on the range was profound. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was taking a moment to acknowledge what it had just witnessed. Kira safed her weapon, stood, and began breaking down her rifle with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. She didn't celebrate, didn't acknowledge the stares, didn't say a word. Just went through her post-firing routine like she was alone on a Montana mountainside, instead of being watched by the best snipers the Navy could produce. Lieutenant Sloan stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. He'd just been beaten by 6 minutes and 1 target by a civilian woman with no formal training. His entire identity, built on being the best, had just been shaken to its foundation. Dex Callahan let out a low whistle and muttered to the SEAL beside him, "Holy shit, she's the real deal." But Sloan wasn't ready to accept it. His pride wouldn't allow it. He stormed toward the range master, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Her scope was pre-zeroed. She had the range card. That's the only explanation. Colonel Sterling's voice crackled over the radio from the tower, ice cold and brooking no argument. "Lieutenant Sloan, stand down." "Ma'am, that performance is statistically impossible without prior knowledge of—" "Then we'll test her again. Different rifle, different range. Right now." The range master approached Kira, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes showing surprise. "Ma'am, we need to verify your performance. You'll use a loaner rifle, unfamiliar optic, 2,000 yards, cold bore, 10 minutes to 0, and engage 3 targets." Kira looked up from her rifle case, her gray eyes meeting his without emotion. "Understood." Dex Callahan stepped forward, unslung his own rifle. It was a different platform than Kira's. Different weight, different balance, different trigger. He handed it over without a word, just a small nod that might have been respect or might have been curiosity about whether she could actually do this. Kira accepted the rifle, checked the chamber, inspected the scope, dry-fired twice to get a feel for the trigger. 3 minutes of examination. Then she moved to a 100-yard target and fired 2 shots to zero the optic at close range, both shots within an inch of each other. She shifted to 300 yards, fired once, confirmed her data. 5 minutes elapsed. 5 minutes to familiarize herself with an unfamiliar weapon system that most shooters would need hours to master. Then she moved to the 1,200-yard line and settled into position. First shot, cold bore, unfamiliar rifle. The hardest shot any sniper could make. The rifle cracked. 1,200 yards away, the steel sang. Second shot, hit. Third shot, hit. 3 for 3. 1,200 yards. Cold bore. Unfamiliar weapon. The range master looked at his spotting scope, then at Kira, then back at the scope as if it might be lying to him. 3 hits. 1,200 yards. Cold bore. Unfamiliar platform. He turned to Lieutenant Sloan, who stood slack-jawed and silent. "Lieutenant, do you have any other concerns about Contractor Blackwood's performance?" Sloan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Finally, he just shook his head and walked away, his shoulders tight with humiliation. But Dex Callahan approached Kira as she returned his rifle, checking it carefully before handing it back. "Ma'am, that was the best shooting I've ever witnessed. Where did you train?" Kira's expression didn't change as she packed her own rifle away. "Montana. Alone. No formal instruction? Just my father's journal. And now, Sergeant Major Hargrave." Dex nodded slowly, processing this information. Then he did something that took courage in front of his teammates. He extended his hand. "Petty Officer Dex Callahan, I apologize for the bullshit earlier. You earned my respect today." Kira shook his hand briefly. Apology accepted. As Dex walked away, he spoke quietly to another SEAL. "She's legit. We need to shut up and learn." That evening, after the formal training had ended and most of the SEALs had retreated to the barracks or gym, Kira found herself in the armory. The space was filled with the smell of gun oil and metal, racks of weapons lining the walls, cleaning supplies organized with military precision. She sat alone at a workbench, running a boar snake through her rifle barrel with slow, meditative strokes. The same ritual she'd performed every night since she was old enough to hold a rifle. Clean the weapon, check the action, ensure everything was perfect for tomorrow. It was meditation. It was prayer. It was the closest thing she had to peace. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. She knew without looking that it was Hargrave. His gait had a particular rhythm, the slight stiffness from old injuries creating a pattern she'd already memorized. He sat on the bench across from her, watching her work for a moment before speaking. "That false wind method on shot 10, you executed it perfectly. Dad's journal, page 63, but he only wrote the formula, not when to use it. That's what I'm here to teach. The journal gives you the what. I give you the when and why." Hargrave leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Starting tonight, after everyone else is asleep, you meet me on the secondary range. 2 to 4 in the morning. We have work to do." Kira looked up from her rifle, her gray eyes meeting his blue ones. "Why didn't you find me sooner? Really?" Hargrave's throat worked. This was the question he'd been dreading, the one he didn't have a good answer for. "I tried. After your father died in Somalia, 97, I called the Casualty Assistance Office. They said you went to family. I assumed you were safe, cared for. I didn't push because I thought the Army would handle it, that there were systems in place." He paused. "Then 2 years later, I heard through a friend that your mother had remarried and moved away. I tried tracking her down, but the trail went cold. Military retirees don't have access to the databases active duty does. I could have pushed harder, called in favors, but I told myself you were probably fine, that Marcus was taking care of you." "He was," Kira said quietly. "Uncle Marcus never mentioned you, but he did right by me. Marcus didn't know me. We served in different units, different times. But from what I've seen of how he raised you, he honored your father's memory. Hargrave's voice cracked slightly. Your father made me promise, Kira. The night before his last deployment, he grabbed my arm and said, if I don't come back, find my daughter. Teach her everything. I'm 28 years late, but I'm here now, and I'm going to keep that promise. Kira returned her attention to the rifle, but her hands had stilled. Then teach me everything he wanted me to know. Starting tonight. But first you need to understand something. Hargrave's voice became harder, more intense. What I'm going to teach you isn't just about shooting. It's about the weight, the cost. Your father killed 19 people in his career, 19 confirmed. Each one stays with you. Each face, each moment, each decision. If I teach you these skills, if you ever use them in combat, you'll carry that weight for the rest of your life. I understand. Do you? Because there's a difference between shooting targets and shooting people, between proving yourself and taking a life. His eyes bored into hers. If you ever have to pull that trigger on a human being, you need to be certain. Not confident, not skilled, certain. Because that decision never leaves you. Kira thought about her father's journal, about the passages where his handwriting changed, became heavier, more deliberate. The entries after his first combat deployment. She'd read those pages 100 times, trying to understand the weight he'd carried. Did my father understand that? Better than anyone I've known, Hargrave said. He never took a life lightly, never treated it as just another mission. Every time, he asked himself if there was another way. And when there wasn't, when the shot had to be made, he made it clean, quick, merciful. He paused. He told me once that a rifle is a tool of precision, but using that tool without conscience is just murder from a distance. Those words, the exact words from the final entry in her father's journal. He wanted me to understand that, Kira said. He wanted you to be more than just a good shooter. He wanted you to understand what the rifle means, the responsibility it carries. Hargrave stood, preparing to leave. 2 a.m., secondary range, dress warm, we have a lot of work ahead of us. The nights that followed became Kira's true education. While the SEALs slept, exhausted from their daytime training, Kira and Hargrave worked in darkness on the secondary range. He taught her techniques from the Gulf War era, from operations in Somalia and Bosnia, and a dozen other places that existed in classified reports and fading memories. Hide site construction using natural materials, no modern netting or artificial camouflage. Just sand, scrub brush, patience, and an understanding of how human eyes tracked movement and recognized patterns. In Kuwait, 91, Hargrave explained as they built a position in the tree line, we didn't have ghillie suits or thermal camouflage, just whatever we could find in the desert. Your father and I spent 3 days in a hide site watching an Iraqi command post. The enemy walked within 10 feet of us twice. They never saw us because we became part of the terrain. Atmospheric reading without electronics. How to judge distance by sound. How to read temperature gradients in mirage patterns. How to feel barometric pressure changes in your sinuses. And know that rain was coming hours before it fell. Your father had a gift for this, Hargrave said on the third night. He could feel when a shot would land clean. Not mysticism, pattern recognition built over 10,000 rounds. You're developing it too. I can see it in how you pause before firing, how you're reading things you can't consciously name. And then there was the moral weight. On the 5th night, as they sat in a hide site watching the stars wheel overhead, Hargrave opened up in a way he rarely did. Your father and I, we took lives. 23 confirmed for me, 19 for him. Every face stays with you. I can tell you about the first man I killed, Kurdish fighter in northern Iraq, 1991. He was setting up a mortar position aimed at a refugee camp. 840 yards, clean headshot. He never knew I was there. Kira listened in silence, understanding that this confession was a gift, a sharing of burden. I think about that man sometimes, Hargrave continued. Wonder if he had a family. Wonder if he believed he was doing the right thing. Then I think about the 300 refugees in that camp who lived because he died. That's the only math that lets me sleep. Does it get easier? No. But your father taught me something in Somalia, 93. We were pinned down, taking fire from multiple positions. He had clear shots on 3 insurgents. He took them all, clean kills, and saved 7 of us. Afterward, I found him behind our vehicle shaking. He said, "I don't shoot to kill. I shoot to protect. The target dies so someone else lives. That's the only math that lets me sleep." Hargrave looked at Kira in the darkness. Do you believe him? I do now. 31 years later, I think about the 23 I killed. Then I think about the 67 Americans who lived because I did. Your father saved at least 40 lives in his career. That's his legacy. Kira absorbed this, sitting with the weight of it. She wasn't naive enough to think she'd never face this choice. The moment Hargrave started teaching her, the moment she agreed to come to Camp Sentinel, she'd set herself on a path that might lead to exactly the situation he described. If I ever have to make that choice, she said slowly, I'll remember this conversation. Good, because the shot is the easy part. Living with it afterward, that's what defines whether you're a warrior or just a killer. On day 14, they ran the hostage rescue simulation. It was the hardest test in the training cycle, designed to be impossible. A mock village with multiple buildings, civilian dummies mixed with hostile targets, time pressure, and consequences for mistakes. Each SEAL went through alone, required to clear the scenario with maximum speed and 0 civilian casualties. In 3 years of running the test, only 2 shooters had managed 0 civilian casualties. Most hit 1 or 2. Some failed spectacularly. The SEALs went first, moving through the village with practiced aggression. They were good, fast, decisive. But the scenario was built to punish pure aggression, to force impossible choices, to create situations where speed and caution warred with each other. Dex Callahan completed it with 1 civilian casualty, a dummy positioned behind a window at an angle that made threat discrimination nearly impossible. Time, 9 minutes, 2 seconds. Lieutenant Sloan, determined to redeem himself after the range humiliation, pushed hard. He completed the course in 8 minutes, 47 seconds, with 0 civilian casualties. The best SEAL performance ever recorded at Camp Sentinel. He emerged from the final building, sweat-soaked and breathing hard, but with satisfaction written across his face. He'd proven something, if only to himself. "Beat that, Blackwood," he muttered as he passed her staging area. Kira approached the village differently than the others. Instead of rushing in the moment the timer started, she spent the first 90 seconds simply observing, studying sightlines, mapping angles, identifying where civilians might be positioned based on the building layouts and cover positions. The SEALs watching from the observation point muttered among themselves. Time was ticking. She was wasting it. But in the tower, Hargrave said nothing. He just watched, recognition dawning. When Kira finally moved, she flowed like water finding its path. She didn't charge through buildings in the linear fashion the course encouraged. Instead, she used angles the designers hadn't fully considered, positions that gave her sight lines through multiple rooms at once. Window target, eliminated. Doorway hostile, down. Rooftop threat, neutralized. She threaded bullets through gaps in the architecture that shouldn't have allowed clean firing lanes, using ricochet geometry in ways that made the range safety officer's eyes widen. Not random spray and pray, but calculated use of hard surfaces to reach targets that were nominally protected. She cleared the entire village in 6 minutes and 4 seconds. 0 civilian casualties. Every hostile neutralized. Several shots that made the observing instructors shake their heads in disbelief. When she emerged from the final building and safed her weapon, the silence from the observation point was absolute. The range master checked his chronograph 3 times, as if he couldn't believe the numbers. Finally, he keyed his radio. All clear, 0 civilian casualties, all hostiles down. Time, 6 minutes, 4 seconds. That's a facility record. Lieutenant Sloan's face went through a visible transformation. Disbelief, anger, then something darker, more dangerous. His pride, his identity, everything he'd built his self-image on, had just been shattered again. He stormed toward the observation tower where Colonel Sterling and Hargrave were stationed, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She had prior access, he said without preamble. Someone gave her the layout. There's no other explanation for those shots. Sterling's expression turned to ice. Lieutenant, that's a serious accusation. Ma'am, she used firing positions that aren't in our doctrine, ricochet shots that require knowing exact wall compositions. That's not improvisation, that's preparation. Hargrave stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Lieutenant Sloan, what you just witnessed is called adaptive thinking. Miss Blackwood cleared that village as a solo operator, not as part of a team. Different mission profile, different tactics. That's bullshit. That's enough. Colonel Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. Lieutenant Sloan, you're relieved from this evaluation. Report to my office at 1400 hours. Dismissed. Sloan's face flushed red, but he knew better than to argue further. He snapped to attention, rendered a salute that was just a shade too sharp to be respectful, and stalked out. That evening, Kira found a protein bar on her cleaning table in the armory. A simple gesture, but meaningful in the Spartan world of special operations. Next to it, a note in Dex Callahan's handwriting. You earned my respect today. Sorry for the BS. Keep showing us how it's done. 2 other SEALs approached her over the next few days, asking questions about her techniques, about how she'd seen angles they'd missed, about the journal her father had kept. The wall of hostility hadn't disappeared, but it had developed cracks. She wasn't one of them, but she wasn't entirely an outsider anymore either. She'd earned something that military culture valued more than friendship. She'd earned respect. On day 21, the secure briefing room filled with an energy that was different from the routine training sessions. Colonel Sterling stood at the front with a tablet displaying classified information, her expression grave. The 8 SEALs filed in, followed by Kira and Hargrave. The presence of video conferencing equipment suggested this was more than a standard evaluation update. The screen flickered to life, revealing a man in desert camouflage. Commander Brennan Thorne, 43 years old with graying temples, and the kind of intense focus that came from leading men into the world's worst places. Behind him, the drab interior of a tactical operations center in Afghanistan. Colonel Sterling, thank you for assembling everyone on short notice. Thorne's voice carried the slight distortion of satellite delay, but remained clear. I'll be direct. My team is deploying to Paktia province within 72 hours. High-value target, Taliban courier carrying ISIS-K network intelligence. Time-sensitive window. Sterling nodded. Commander, your request indicated you need additional assets. Not additional, different. Thorne's eyes scanned the faces on his screen. Intel confidence on this operation is medium at best. My gut says it's wrong. The numbers don't add up. The patterns don't match. And I've been doing this long enough to know when something feels off. He paused, letting that sink in. I need someone who sees what we miss. Someone who doesn't think like we do, who isn't bound by our doctrine or our assumptions. I need fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. His gaze settled on Kira's position in the room, though the camera angle meant he was looking slightly to the side. I need Contractor Blackwood, and if he's willing, I need Sergeant Major Hargrave as senior advisor. The room went silent. This was no longer an evaluation exercise. This was combat deployment, real stakes, real bullets, real consequences. Sterling spoke carefully. Commander, this is highly irregular. Contractor Blackwood has no combat experience, No formal military training. The liability implications alone. I've reviewed her performance metrics from Camp Sentinel. Perfect scores, tactical thinking that exceeds my current team's capabilities, and most importantly, she doesn't have institutional blindness. When intel is wrong, she'll see it. When we're walking into something we shouldn't, she'll know it. Thorne's voice carried absolute certainty. Colonel, I'm not asking for another shooter. I have shooters. I'm asking for someone who can tell me when I'm about to get my people killed. Kira felt 8 pairs of eyes turn toward her. She kept her expression neutral, her hands steady, but inside her heart was hammering. Afghanistan, combat, the abstract skills she'd honed in Montana wilderness, suddenly becoming concrete matters of life and death. Miss Blackwood, Thorne said, speaking directly to her now, I know this isn't what you signed up for, but I'm asking anyway. 3 weeks, advisory role, Overwatch position only. You observe, you report, you advise. No direct engagement unless I explicitly authorize it. You'd be positioned 1.3 miles from the objective. Insurance policy, nothing more. Kira found her voice, though it came out quieter than she intended. What's the intel saying? Hostile count, equipment level? 8 to 12 hostiles, poorly armed, no professional military training. Thorne's expression suggested he didn't believe a word of it. But like I said, my gut tells me that's wrong. Paktia province doesn't do small cells anymore, not after we cleared the major Taliban strongholds last year. Rules of engagement? Observe and report only. No engagement without my explicit authorization. You'd be working with Sergeant Major Hargrave, establishing observation post on a ridge overlooking the village. Radio contact throughout. If things go sideways, you extract to the backup landing zone and wait for retrieval. Kira looked at Hargrave. The old Sergeant Major's face was unreadable, but his eyes held a question. This was her choice to make. She thought about her father's journal, about the final entry where he'd written about choices and consequences, about being the kind of person who protected others, even when it cost you something. She thought about the weight Hargrave had described, the faces that stayed with you, the math of lives saved versus lives taken. Can I have 24 hours to decide? Understood. I'll need your answer by tomorrow at 1800 hours. Thorne nodded respectfully. Thank you for considering it. The screen went dark. After the briefing, Kira walked alone to the secondary range where she and Hargrave had spent so many nights. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, the Virginia mountains beautiful in a way that reminded her of home. She sat on the shooting platform, her back against the support post, and pulled out her father's journal. She'd read it cover to cover 100 times, but she turned to the final entries now, the ones written in the weeks before his death. His handwriting had changed by then, become heavier, more deliberate. The words of a man who knew he might not come home. March 1997, last entry before deployment. I've been thinking about what we do, what we're asked to do, what we choose to do. There's a difference between those 3 things that most people never have to contemplate. We're asked to be weapons. We're trained to be precise. But we choose whether to be conscientious or just efficient. That choice matters more than any shot I've ever made. Kira traced the words with her finger, imagining her father writing them by lamplight in some forward operating base, knowing he was about to walk into danger again. If you're reading this, little one, then I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted to teach you myself, wanted to watch you grow up, wanted to be there for all the moments fathers are supposed to see. But if Thad found you, if he's teaching you what I couldn't, then know this. You're my legacy. Whatever you become, whoever you choose to be, make it count. A rifle is a tool of precision, but using it without conscience is just murder from a distance. Be better than that. Be better than me. She closed the journal and watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Footsteps behind her. She knew without looking that it was Hargrave. He sat beside her, grunting slightly as his old knees protested the movement. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You don't have to go," he said finally. "You've already proven everything you needed to prove. You could walk away right now, go back to Montana, and nobody would think less of you." "Would you go, if you were in my position?" Hargrave was quiet, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "When I was your age, wild horses couldn't have kept me away. The idea of proving myself in combat, of testing everything I'd learned against real stakes, I'd have jumped at it." He paused. "But I'm not 27 anymore. I know what it costs now. I know what you carry afterward. You said good people have to do hard things. I did, and I believe it. But Kira, there's a difference between understanding that intellectually and experiencing it viscerally. When you pull that trigger on a human being for the first time, something changes. You can't unchange it. You can't go back to who you were before." Kira turned to look at him. "My father changed, but he kept serving, kept making those choices. Why? Because he decided that if good people refused to stand in the gap, then bad people would be the only ones standing. Because he believed that protecting the innocent was worth the cost to his soul." Hargrave's voice roughened. "He told me once, 'I carry ghosts so other people don't have to.' That's the trade I made, and I'd make it again." Commander Thorne has a team depending on him. If the intel is wrong, if they walk into something they shouldn't, people die. I might be able to prevent that. You might. Or you might find yourself in a position where you have to make choices you're not ready for." Hargrave put a hand on her shoulder. "I'll support whatever you decide. If you go, I go with you. If you walk away, I'll help you get back to Montana, and nobody will hear a word of criticism from me. But make this choice for yourself, not for your father's memory or for some abstract idea of duty. Make it because you're willing to carry the weight." Kira watched the last light fade from the sky, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her like snow. "I need to think about it." "Take your time. You have until tomorrow evening." But that night, alone in her quarters with her father's journal open on the desk, Kira already knew what her answer would be. She'd known the moment Commander Thorne had explained the situation. Maybe she'd even known when she agreed to come to Camp Sentinel in the first place. Some paths, once you stepped onto them, only led forward. The next morning, she found Agent Fowler in the administrative building. "I'll go. 3 weeks. Advisory role. Then I'm done. Forever." Fowler nodded, relief evident on his face. "Understood. Deployment is in 48 hours. You'll need to complete accelerated briefings on—" "I'll handle it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Agent Fowler, if this goes wrong, if something happens to me out there, make sure someone takes care of my cabin in Montana. The coordinates are in my file. Everything I own is there, including my father's journal. Make sure it doesn't get lost." For once, Fowler's bureaucratic demeanor cracked slightly. "Miss Blackwood, Commander Thorne is one of the best in the business. You'll be fine. Just make sure someone knows about the cabin." That afternoon, Lieutenant Sloan appeared at the armory where Kira was preparing her equipment. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking, his usual arrogance replaced by something more complicated. "Heard you're going to Afghanistan." Kira didn't look up from her rifle maintenance. "Word travels fast. I pulled some strings. I'm on Thorne's team for this deployment." He stepped closer. "Despite being relieved from the evaluation here, I'm still a SEAL, and Commander Thorne needs every operator he can get." Now Kira did look up, her gray eyes meeting his. "Why are you telling me this?" Sloane's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. "Because I was wrong about you. At Camp Sentinel, I thought you were a diversity stunt, a political play, someone who didn't deserve to be here. I mocked you. I tried to get you disqualified. I was an asshole. Yes, you were. You outshot me. You outthought me. You beat my best time on the hostage rescue by almost 3 minutes." His voice dropped. "You're better than me. And instead of accepting that, I threw a tantrum like a child." Kira waited, sensing there was more. In Afghanistan, if things go bad, I need you to know that I'll have your back. Whatever happened here, whatever ego bullshit I brought to this evaluation, it doesn't matter out there. We're on the same team. I'll protect you the same way I protect any operator on that mission. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. Close enough. Acknowledged, Lieutenant. I appreciate you saying that. Sloan nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Blackwood, that journal you carry, your father's. I heard you mention it to Dex. My dad was Army, served in the First Gulf War, died when I was 16. I don't have anything like that from him. No letters, no journal, nothing. You're lucky. Then he was gone, leaving Kira alone with that observation and the weight it carried. Kandahar airfield hit like a physical force. The heat was oppressive, a dry furnace blast that made Virginia summers feel like spring mornings. Kira stepped off the C-17 transport into chaos barely contained by military discipline. Helicopters coming and going, convoys assembling, soldiers moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. She'd never felt more out of place in her life. Hargrave stayed close, his presence reassuring in the overwhelming foreignness of it all. Despite his age, he moved through the base with the confidence of someone who'd been in these places before, who knew the rhythm and flow of forward operating bases in hostile territory. Commander Thorne met them at the flight line. Up close, he looked older than his video appearance suggested, with deep lines around his eyes and the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments in too many years. But his handshake was firm, his gaze direct and assessing. Miss Blackwood, Sergeant Major Hargrave, welcome to Kandahar. I wish we had time for proper orientation, but we're wheels up in 6 hours. He gestured toward a waiting vehicle. Let's get you briefed. The Tactical Operations Center was a climate-controlled haven from the heat outside, filled with maps, satellite imagery, and the constant murmur of radio traffic. Thorne's team was already assembled, 7 SEALs plus Lieutenant Sloan, all studying the mission profile with the focus of men who knew their lives might depend on remembering every detail. Dex Callahan was there, his red hair distinctive, even in the muted lighting. He nodded at Kira with something that might have been approval or might have been concern. Hard to tell with operators who kept their emotions locked down. Thorne pulled up the mission map on a large display screen. Satellite imagery showed a small village nestled in a mountain valley, surrounded by steep ridges and narrow approaches. Our target is here, small village, maybe 30 structures, population less than 200. Intel says our courier is in this building. He highlighted a compound near the village center. Single story, 3 rooms, 2 exit points. According to our sources, he's meeting with local Taliban leadership to hand off the ISIS-K intelligence package. Hostile count? Hargrave asked. Intel says 8 to 12 hostiles. Light arms, maybe 1 PKM machine gun. No professional training. Thorne's expression made it clear what he thought of that assessment. But Paktia province has been too quiet lately. The Taliban aren't operating in cells that small anymore. They learned from getting hammered by our operations over the past 2 years. They work in larger, coordinated groups now. He zoomed the map out, showing the surrounding terrain. Miss Blackwood, Sergeant Major Hargrave, you'll establish an observation post here. He indicated a ridge northeast of the village. 1.3 miles from the target building, elevated position, clear sight lines to all approaches. You'll have radio contact throughout. Your job is to be our insurance policy. Watch for what we miss. Look for signs that intel is wrong. And if things go sideways, you call it out. Rules of engagement? Kira asked. Observe and report only. You do not engage unless I explicitly authorize it. Thorne's voice carried absolute authority. Is that clear? Clear, sir. Good. He turned to his SEAL team. We insert at 0300 hours. Black Hawk drops us in a dry riverbed 2 clicks south of the village. Overwatch team separates and moves to the ridge. We'll wait for dawn, use the early light to minimize civilian exposure, Then hit the target fast and hard. Bag the courier, secure the intelligence package, and exfil to the rally point. Total time on target, 15 minutes or less. One of the SEALs raised a hand. Commander, what's the backup plan if intel is wrong and we're facing more than a dozen hostiles? Then we adapt and overcome, same as always. That's why we have Overwatch with fresh eyes. Thorne looked at each man in turn. Questions? No one spoke. All right, final gear check at 2200 hours. Get some rest. It's going to be a long night. As the briefing broke up, Thorne approached Kira and Hargrave privately. Off the record, he said quietly, my gut is screaming that this mission is wrong. The intel is too clean, too convenient. Taliban don't leave themselves exposed like this anymore. Not in Paktia. What's your best guess on actual hostile count? Hargrave asked. Double what intel says. Maybe 20 to 25, coordinated, possibly waiting for us. Thorne looked at Kira. That's why you're there. If I'm walking my team into an ambush, I need someone positioned to see the whole battlefield. Someone who can tell me when to abort before it's too late. Kira nodded slowly. And if it's too late to abort? If you're already engaged when the ambush triggers? Thorne's expression went hard. Then I'm trusting you to do whatever it takes to get my people out alive. That evening, sitting on the edge of an empty tarmac, while the sun set over the Hindu Kush Mountains, Kira and Hargrave had their final conversation before deployment. What if I have to shoot someone tomorrow? Kira asked, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of generators and aircraft. Then you'll carry it, like your father, like me. How? Hargrave was quiet for a long moment, watching the light fade from the sky. You remember why you pulled the trigger. Not hatred, not anger, protection. You shot so someone else could live. That's the only reason that matters. He turned to look at her. Your father killed 3 men in one day during the Somalia operation. Saved 7 of us by doing it. I found him afterward, sitting behind our vehicle, hands shaking. He said, I know it was necessary, but necessary doesn't make it easy. Did he regret it? Every single time. But he never regretted the lives he saved. Hargrave put a hand on her shoulder. If you have to shoot tomorrow, you'll see that person's face for the rest of your life. That's the cost. But you'll also see Commander Thorne go home to his family. You'll see Dex and Sloan and the others survive. That's the payment. Kira nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. One more thing, Hargrave said. Your father's last words to me, before he deployed to Somalia for the last time, were, take care of my daughter if I don't come back. Tomorrow, I'm going to keep that promise. Whatever happens out there, I'm not letting anything happen to you. That's not your job, Sergeant Major. I can take care of myself. Maybe, but I made a promise to a dying friend 28 years ago, and I'm damn well going to keep it now. His voice softened. You're all I have left of Nolan Blackwood. I'm not losing you too. They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely. 2 people connected by a ghost, preparing to walk into the kind of violence that changes everyone it touches. Above them, stars began appearing in the Afghan sky, cold and distant, and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. The Black Hawk helicopter flew through absolute darkness, its pilots using night vision to navigate terrain that would be suicide to attempt in daylight. Inside, 9 people sat in silence. 7 SEALs, Lieutenant Sloan and Commander Thorne on one side, Kira and Hargrave on the other. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. In a few minutes, they'd be on the ground in hostile territory, and words wouldn't matter anymore. Only actions, only choices, only the training that became instinct when conscious thought was too slow. Kira felt her heart hammering but kept her breathing steady. 4 count in, 6 count out, hold. The same rhythm she used before making long-range shots. The same technique her father had written about in his journal, learned from Hargrave, passed down through pages to a daughter he'd never met. The helicopter descended sharply, making her stomach lurch. Then it touched down for exactly 4 seconds, just long enough for everyone to dismount before lifting off again and disappearing into the night sky. Silence rushed in to fill the space left by the rotors. Not complete silence. The mountains held sounds of their own. Wind over rock, distant animal calls, the faint rumble of a vehicle somewhere far away. But the kind of quiet that made you aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every small noise your equipment made. Commander Thorne hand-signaled his team. They moved out toward the village in two-man elements, shadows disappearing into terrain that swallowed them whole. Kira and Hargrave went the opposite direction, climbing toward the ridge that would give them overwatch on the entire operation. 90 minutes of brutal scrambling up loose scree and sharp rocks. Elevation that made breathing hard and movement harder. Hargrave, despite his 71 years, kept pace through sheer determination and muscle memory. This was what he'd trained for his entire adult life, and age might slow him, but it hadn't stopped him. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they'd established a hide site that would be invisible to anyone more than 10 feet away. Natural materials, careful positioning, patience. The old methods that had kept soldiers alive before technology made killing easier, but survival no harder. Kira set up her rifle, ranged key landmarks, and created a mental map of the entire valley below. The village looked peaceful in the growing light. Small mud brick structures, narrow paths between buildings, a well at the center. People would wake soon, start their day, never knowing that armed men were moving toward them in the darkness. She keyed her radio, speaking quietly. "Overwatch in position." Commander Thorne's voice came back, distorted by encryption, but clear enough. "Copy that, Overwatch, standing by for sunrise." Hargrave lay beside her with his own rifle, scanning sectors, watching for anything unusual. Two sets of eyes, two different generations of training, two people united by a promise made to a dead man. The sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful and terrible at once, like most things in war. And then Kira saw something that made her pulse quicken. Movement on the northwest ridge, 900 meters from the village, not where it should be. A brief flash of reflected light, there and gone in an instant. Glass or metal catching the sun. She adjusted her scope, focused on the position, waited. There, another flash, and this time she saw the shape. A person, prone, with optical equipment, binoculars or a rifle scope. Someone was watching the village. Someone who wasn't part of Thorne's team. "Commander, Overwatch. I have possible hostile observation post, northwest ridge, 900 meters from village." A pause, then Thorne's voice came back. "Negative, Overwatch. Intel shows single-cell village confined, probably local traffic." Kira kept her scope on the position. The figure moved slightly, adjusting position, and she caught another glint of glass. Definitely optical equipment. Definitely watching. "Sir, I have positive ID on optical equipment. Someone's running Overwatch on that village." "Overwatch, Intel assessment shows low probability of second cell. Maintain observation but do not engage unless I authorize." Beside her, Hargrave muttered under his breath, "Intel's wrong. This is a trap." "Your call," Kira whispered back. "Keep watching that position. When this goes bad, we're going to need to know where threats are coming from." Below in the valley, she watched Thorne's team enter the village, moving in two-man elements, clearing angles, approaching the target building with professional efficiency. Everything looked clean. Everything looked like a textbook operation. But Kira's instincts screamed warning. The team reached the target building. Radio traffic increased. Brief bursts of communication confirming room clearance. "Breach! Breach! Breach!" "Room 1 clear." "Room 2 clear." "Target secured. We have the courier." Thorne's voice, controlled and professional. "All teams, exfilled a rally point." Then everything went to hell. The ambush erupted from three sides simultaneously. Not 8 to 12 poorly armed hostiles. At least 25 fighters, coordinated, carrying modern weapons, moving with military precision. PKM machine guns, RPGs, AK-47s in trained hands. They'd waited for the SEALs to commit, to be deep inside the village with limited exit routes before springing the trap. Contact! Thorne's voice cracked over the radio, professional calm, barely masking urgent intensity. Multiple hostiles, all sides, were surrounded. Gunfire erupted in the village below. Kira watched through her scope as muzzle flashes blossomed from windows and rooftops, as her worst fears became reality. On a rooftop where he'd positioned himself as designated marksman, Dex Callahan began engaging targets. But he was exposed, visible, and within seconds, hostile fire found him. She saw him jerk, twist, go down clutching his shoulder. "Callahan's hit!" someone shouted over the radio. Commander Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. "Overwatch, we need fire support." Kira's finger moved to her trigger, steady as stone despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She'd ranged the village during her initial setup. She knew every distance, every angle, every possible shot. 850 yards to the nearest hostile position, 920 to the second. Elevated shots, wind from the northeast, temperature rising as the sun climbed. "Overwatch, you are not cleared to engage," Thorne's voice, remembering the rules of engagement even in the chaos. "I repeat, not cleared." Kira looked at Hargrave. The old sergeant major's face was grim. "They're dying down there," she said quietly. "I know. Would you prefer I follow orders while good men die, or break rules to save them?" Hargrave's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once. Kira keyed her radio, her voice calm despite everything. "Commander Thorne, with respect, your men are dying. I can help, or I can watch. Choose now." A pause that lasted less than a second but felt like eternity. "Cleared to engage. Light them up, Overwatch." Kira's world narrowed to the scope, to the trigger, to the targets below. She fired. 850 yards away, the hostile fighter, setting up a PKM machine gun, dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Clean kill. Instant. "Contact eliminated," Kira said into her radio, chambering another round with liquid efficiency. Engaging targets. For the next 11 minutes, Kira became something other than herself. Not a woman, not a person, but an extension of her rifle. Her father's training, Hargrave's teaching, years of solitary practice in Montana mountains, all of it converged into a series of shots that approached perfection. Beside her, Hargrave worked as spotter, calling corrections with the efficiency of decades of experience. 920, hostile with RPG, windage left, .2. Kira adjusted, fired. The RPG gunner fell before he could launch. 1160, rooftop sniper, partially obscured. She saw the angle through a gap in the architecture, threaded the needle. Down. 870, three hostiles near Callahan's position. 3 shots, 3 kills. Dex was pinned, but alive. The battlefield was chaos, but through her scope it became a series of problems to solve. Geometry and physics, wind and distance, intention and execution. A fighter emerged from a doorway, a K-47 raised toward Lieutenant Sloan's position. Kira's bullet found him at 915 yards before he could fire. Sloan never even knew how close he'd come to death. Another hostile on a rooftop, RPG on his shoulder, aiming at the building where half the SEAL team had taken cover. 1,040 yards. Kira led the target, accounting for his movement, fired. The man collapsed, the RPG unfired. Hargrave picked up his own rifle, muscle memory overriding his 71 years. 2 shots at 780 meters, 2 more hostiles eliminated. The old sergeant major still had it. 12 o'clock, your sector, Kira said, spotting targets in Hargrave's field of fire. "I see them. 2 more shots, two more down. They worked in tandem, covering different sectors, protecting the SEALs from threats they couldn't see. The ridge gave them God's eye view of the entire battlefield, and they used every inch of that advantage. By the time the smoke cleared, 9 enemy fighters lay dead from Kira's rifle, 2 from Hargrave's. The remaining hostiles broke contact, retreating into the mountains, unwilling to face an enemy they couldn't see or locate. "Overwatch, cease fire," Thorne's voice came through, shaking slightly. "Hostiles are retreating. You just saved 8 lives. We're moving to exfil." But Kira wasn't done scanning. Her instincts screamed that something was still wrong. She swept her scope across the northwest ridge, the position she'd identified at dawn. Then she saw him, a figure standing, no longer concealing himself. Professional sniper with Western tactical gear, high-end rifle, Chechen or Eastern European contractor, hired by Taliban for exactly this kind of operation. And a red laser dot appeared, not on a building, not on terrain, on Commander Thorne's chest as he walked point toward the rally point, leading his team to safety. "Thorne!" Kira shouted into the radio, her voice cracking with urgency. "Red dot on your chest, northwest ridge." Thorne froze mid-step, looked down, saw the crimson point of light dancing over his heart. Hargrave ranged the target instantly, his hands moving with practiced speed. 15-17 yards, uphill 19 degrees, wind variable, 8 to 14 knots, gusting from northeast. Kira's breathing stopped. 1,517 yards, nearly a mile. Uphill, variable wind, through morning heat shimmer. It was the kind of shot that existed in the realm of theoretical possibility, but practical impossibility. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Your father made a 14-20-yard shot in a sandstorm in Kuwait, 91. Saved my life." Hargrave's hand gripped her shoulder, his voice absolutely certain. "You're Nolan Blackwood's daughter. This is what we do. We make impossible shots so good people go home." 3 seconds until the enemy sniper fired. Maybe less. Below in the valley, Thorne stood frozen, knowing he was dead, knowing there was nothing he could do. His team shouted for him to move, but movement wouldn't matter. Not at this range. Not with a professional on the trigger. Kira's world contracted to absolute clarity. Everything Hargrave had taught her, everything her father had written, everything she'd practiced in Montana wilderness, it all came down to this moment. Breath. 4 count in, 6 count out, hold. Heartbeat. Slow, steady, 52 beats per minute. Wind. She read it through grass movement on the ridge, dust patterns in the village, mirage distortion in the air. The false wind method. Apparent wind said northeast at 10 knots, but terrain indicators contradicted. The real wind was northeast at 7, gusting 12. Calculate the inverse. Trust the terrain. Mathematics. Elevation 19 degrees uphill required adding 6 minutes of angle. Windage at this distance with 7 knots gusting 12 required 4.2 mils left. Coriolis effect at this latitude, this direction, 0.8 mils additional left correction. Air density at this altitude, this temperature, slight decrease in bullet velocity, add 0.3 mils elevation. But beneath all the math, beneath all the conscious calculation, was something else. The thing Hargrave had called shooter's intuition. Pattern recognition built over 10,000 rounds. The feeling, not mysticism, but deep subconscious processing, that this shot would land. Certainty washed over her like cold water. Her father had made this shot. Hargrave had made shots like this. She carried their legacy in her hands, their knowledge in her mind, their certainty in her heart. This bullet would fly true because it had to, because 8 men deserved to go home, because good people had to stand in the gap, because a rifle was a tool of precision, and she would use that tool with conscience. She fired. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, familiar and solid. The crack of the shot echoed across the valley, clear, and final. 1,517 yards away, the bullet flew. Time seemed to slow, though it was only 1.8 seconds of flight. The bullet climbed, arced, dropped, adjusted for wind, traced an invisible path through morning air. Kira watched through her scope, her breathing suspended, as the bullet closed the distance. It entered through the enemy sniper's rifle scope, through the front lens, traveled through the optic body, and emerged from the ocular lens before entering his right eye socket. The man dropped instantly, killed before his nervous system could process what had happened. The red dot vanished from Thorne's chest. For a moment, silence. The valley held its breath. Then Thorne's voice over the radio, barely above a whisper. "Overwatch, did you just—" "Enemy sniper neutralized," Kira said, her voice steady despite her hands shaking now with adrenaline crash. "You're clear to exfil point." Longer silence, then Thorne again. "How far was that shot?" 17 yards, Hargrave answered, his voice carrying unmistakable pride. "Through his scope." Radio silence stretched out, everyone processing what that meant. Then Dex Callahan's voice, awed despite his pain. "Through the scope? That's not possible." "Apparently it is," Sloan muttered. Thorne keyed his radio one more time. "Overwatch, you just saved my life. I will never, ever forget this. We're moving to exfil. Thank you." Kira and Hargrave remained in position, providing overwatch as the SEAL team moved to the rally point. The helicopters came in low and fast 15 minutes later, loading personnel and the captured courier before disappearing into the morning sky. Only after the SEALs were safely away did Kira lower her rifle. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She'd killed 9 people today, 9 human beings who'd woken up this morning not knowing it would be their last day alive. Hargrave saw it in her face. "Come on," he said gently. "Our ride's coming. We'll talk about it later." They packed up the hide site, erasing evidence of their presence, and moved to their extraction point. A separate helicopter picked them up, the pilot keeping radio silence as they flew back to Kandahar. Kira stared out the window at the Afghan mountains falling away below, seeing nothing, feeling everything. Back at Kandahar, she went straight to the armory. Empty now in the midday heat, most personnel either sleeping or on duty. She sat at a workbench and began cleaning her rifle with movements that had become compulsive, obsessive. She'd been cleaning for 20 minutes when Hargrave found her. He sat on the bench across from her, saying nothing at first, just being present. 9 people, Kira finally said, her voice barely audible. "I killed 9 people today, and I felt nothing. In the moment, just execution." "The feeling comes later," Hargrave said quietly. "Right now you're in shock. Combat high, then the crash. It'll hit in a few hours, maybe days." "Does it hit you? Still?" "Every time. 31 years later, I still see faces. I can tell you about the 2 I killed today. Their positions, their weapons, how they fell." He paused. "But I also see the 8 men I saved. 67 Americans alive because I pulled triggers over the years. Your father saved 40 plus. You saved 8 today. That's the only math that matters." Kira's hands stilled on the rifle. "My father, in his journal after Somalia, his handwriting changed, got heavier. I always wondered what that meant. It meant he was carrying it. The weight of what he'd done, who he'd killed, why it was necessary." Hargrave's voice was rough with memory, but he chose to let it make him more conscious of how fragile life is, not less. More aware of what mattered, not less. That's what I meant about the choice. "I don't feel like I have a choice. I just feel heavy." "That heaviness is your conscience working. That's good. That's human." He stood, put a hand on her shoulder. "Clean your rifle. Get some rest. Tomorrow we fly home. And then you decide what comes next." That night, Kira lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faces. The 9 men she'd killed, their final moments, the way they'd fallen. But she also saw Commander Thorne touching his chest where the red dot had been, alive because she'd pulled the trigger. Saw Dex Callahan, wounded but alive, being carried to the helicopter. Saw the entire SEAL team, battered but breathing, because she'd violated her rules of engagement. The weight was real, but so was the worth. Kandahar airstrip, dawn the next morning. Kira stood alone, rifle case at her feet, waiting for the C-130 that would take her home. The sunrise over the Hindu Kush was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Golden lights spilling across mountains that had seen more violence than she could imagine. Boots on concrete behind her. She turned to find Commander Thorne approaching, followed by his 7 SEALs, including a bandaged Dex Callahan and Lieutenant Sloan. All of them wore full-dress uniforms, Navy service dress blues, medals gleaming in the morning light. Thorne stopped 10 feet away, removed his cover, and rendered a full military salute. Held it, formal and sincere. "Miss Kira Blackwood," his voice carried across the empty tarmac. "You hold no rank, you swore no oath, you wear no uniform, but you possess something that most soldiers never earn in a lifetime of service." He paused, letting the words settle. "The absolute respect of everyone who witnessed what you did in Paktia province." His voice strengthened, official now, as if reading a citation. "You violated your rules of engagement to save my team. You made 9 confirmed kills in 11 minutes under combat conditions. You executed a 1,517-yard shot through an enemy sniper's optic, eliminating a threat that intelligence never identified and doctrine never prepared us for. You saved 8 American lives." Another pause, heavy with meaning. That is the definition of heroism. One by one, the SEALs stepped forward and saluted. Dex Callahan first, his arms steady despite the bandages. Then the others in sequence. Finally, Lieutenant Sloan, who met her eyes and nodded with something that looked like genuine respect, maybe even admiration. 8 trident holders, warriors who'd earned their place through trials that broke lesser men, saluting a civilian woman with no rank and no name. Kira stood frozen, uncertain how to respond. She wasn't military. She couldn't return the salute. Protocol didn't even have a category for this moment. But she gave what she could, a deep, respectful nod, meeting each man's eyes in turn. Silent acknowledgement of what they'd been through together, what they'd survived, what it meant. When they finally lowered their salutes, Thorne approached closer. He pulled a card from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "My personal cell number. Day or night, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me." His voice dropped. "That's a debt I can never repay, but I'll spend my life trying." He reached into another pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Unfolded it carefully. Inside was a brass cartridge, the casing from the bullet that had killed the enemy sniper. Someone had recovered it from the northwest ridge. 1,517 yards, Thorne said, placing it in her hand. "Through his scope. Nobody's going to believe it happened, but we know. We were there." Kira's fingers closed around the brass, still warm, somehow, though it had been fired over 12 hours ago. "Thank you, sir." "No, thank you." Thorne stepped back, rendered one final salute, then turned and led his team away. Kira watched them go, the brass cartridge heavy in her palm, heavier than any object that small should be. The C-130's engines started behind her. Time to go home. 6 months later, Montana's summer arrived with the sudden intensity it always did. Snow melting in days instead of weeks, the high country opening up like a fist unclenching. Kira had been back at her cabin for half a year now, trying to figure out who she was after Afghanistan. The nightmares had been bad at first, waking up at 3 a.m., seeing faces, hearing gunfire that wasn't there. She'd tried the VA, but they'd turned her away. "You're not a veteran. We can't treat you." So she dealt with it alone, the way she dealt with everything. Long hikes in the mountains, cleaning her rifle every night, reading her father's journal over and over, looking for wisdom in words written by a man who'd carried the same weight. The truck coming up the dirt road was familiar now. Hargrave visited once a month, making the 8-hour drive to check on her, to share the burden, to make sure she was still standing. They sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "The nightmares getting any better?" Hargrave asked. "Some nights." She pulled her father's journal from her jacket pocket. "I read his entries about Somalia. He wrote that carrying the weight with honor meant remembering why you pulled the trigger. Protection, not hatred. That helps." He was right. But 9 faces, Thad. I see them every night, every single one. And 8 men who went home to their families because of what you did. Hargrave reached into his own pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Commander Thorne wanted you to have this." Kira opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of Thorne hugging his 8-year-old daughter, both of them smiling at the camera. Behind them, a suburban house with a tire swing in the yard. Normal life. Safe life. A handwritten note fell out. "Because of you, I got to see her again." She drew this picture of us. "I think about that red dot on my chest and what would have happened if you hadn't been on that ridge. Thank you for my life. Brennan." A child's crayon drawing came with it. Stick figures labeled Daddy and me, holding hands under a smiling sun. Kira's eyes watered. Not quite crying, but close. "There's something else," Hargrave said. "I've been offered a position, teaching at Camp Sentinel, advanced precision marksmanship and tactical ethics. They want someone to train the next generation differently, more focus on the moral weight, less on just technical skill." He paused, watching her reaction. "They want you too, as my co-instructor. Teach the things your father would have taught if he'd lived. Pass down the knowledge from that journal, from what you learned, from what you experienced." Kira was quiet for a long time, processing. "I don't know if I can go back there." "I understand, but think about it. Those SEALs you worked with, they're asking for you. Dex Callahan specifically requested you help develop their training protocols. Says you see things they miss. What would I even teach? The same thing your father taught me, that a rifle is a tool of precision, but using it without conscience is just murder from a distance. That the shot is easy, but living with it afterward is what matters. That good people have to do hard things, but how you do them defines who you become." Hargrave stood, preparing to leave. "You don't have to decide now, but the offer stands. Come to Virginia in September. Help me teach. Help make sure the next generation understands what that brass cartridge in your pocket really means." After he left, Kira sat alone on the porch, turning the cartridge over in her fingers. 1,517 yards, through a scope. One shot that had saved a man's life, ended another's, and changed hers forever. She pulled out her father's journal, turned to the final page. "You're my legacy. Whatever you become, whoever you choose to be, make it count. Make it count." Teaching the next generation would make it count. Passing down the knowledge, the skills, and most importantly, the understanding of what it all meant. That would honor her father's memory better than anything else she could do. Kira pulled out her phone, found the number Hargrave had left, and typed a message. "I'll come to Virginia in September. Let's teach them how to carry the weight." She hit send, feeling something shift in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but purpose, direction, a path forward that honored both the dead and the living. Above Montana, stars began appearing in the deepening sky, cold and bright and eternal. Her father's stars, Hargrave's stars, her stars now too. Kira sat on the porch of her father's cabin, holding his journal, carrying his legacy, preparing to pass it all forward to those who would come after. The rifle was a tool of precision, but wielding it with conscience, that was the art of being human. And teaching that art to the next generation, that was how you made it count.